Well, we know is that he is the commander of the Zimbabwean Defense Force and a strong ally of the dismissed Vice President Emerson Mnangagwa. His press conference yesterday was in part, protests, at the dismissal of the former Vice President.
Right, and he talks about, we didn't hear that in that clip, but if you listen to the whole press conference, he talks about preserving the integrity of those who were part of the 1970s liberation war. Is it fair to say that many members of the current Zimbabwe army did not go to that war and simply do not identify with what General Chiwenga had to say?
Yes, it is fair to say that, yes, because they gained independence 37 years ago, and I'm sure most of the current crop of the Zimbabwean military, maybe were very young when Zimbabwe gained independence. All right, but let me say, I lived in Zimbabwe for about 18 months, some years back, and I came to realize that the so-called the liberation fighters, called the war veterans, were some sort of regarded as some sort of a sacred cow, right? And they were untouchable. So anybody who grew up, in the era, in the war of liberation era, okay, and anybody, who was old enough to witness those things, will not take it lightly, lying down. If any of these so-called war veteran, the liberators, were touched.
Right.
And what riles, I believe, the general, that is the emergence of the G40 within the ZANU-PF.
That's a very good point. So the idea of liberation figures, I mean, the general was praising the sacked vice president as a liberation figure. Is that the fault line within ZANU-PF, that there is a new, younger generation who are around Grace Mugabe against the older figures? Is that a fair sketch of that situation?
Yeah, my perception, or my view is that they fear, the ascendancy of the G40, spearheaded by the First Lady, Grace Mugabe. So should somebody like, say, Grace Mugabe succeed her husband, or should anybody from that faction succeed Mugabe, right? These so-called war veterans, the liberators, fear being sidelined, right? So they will do anything, they can to safeguard.
But are they
position.
still powerful enough? I mean, do you see the general making an empty threat, or does he have the power, along with the other veterans, to pull through with this? Could he, if he wanted to, intervene with the army?
You know what, Charles? No soldier worth the uniform, he wears would openly threaten a coup, if he indeed, intends to carry out stage a coup.
So how much now depends on what Robert Mugabe does next? He's pushed out the vice president, Emerson Mnangagwa, who led a faction in the ruling party. Will he turn to the military now and make some changes there?
I believe so. I always, call Mugabe, the wily old fox. And he has the ability to outmaneuver most of his enemies, most of his opponents. I mean, look, nobody ever thought, right, that Mnangagwa, could be dismissed. Okay, he was one of his chief lieutenants, right? So I believe the next move that Mugabe might do is to sack this general. So if he doesn't take any action, his position will be seen to have weakened.
That's a good point, because that raises the question of whether or not you think Mr. Mugabe is still firmly in control. Because how can a general go around saying things like, like what he said, if the president is in charge?
Well, the president is in charge because he threatened, to sack Mnangagwa 24 hours before he actually carried out the threat. I believe he's in charge, yes. Though I believe he's, considering his age, his advanced age, whatever, right? The wife might be maybe pulling some strings.
So given what you just said, all that does make one wonder what the future portends for Zimbabwe when you have a divided ruling party and a divided military.
What might happen now, right now, as I told you, some youth, are rising against the army, protesting against the army, the general in particular. Okay, so number one, either Mugabe sacks the general, and if he doesn't, it will seem like his position is weakening.
Right.
And the situation is so fluid, anything at all
Can happen.
Yes, yeah.
What's the general mood and disposition in southern Africa towards military coups? I mean, I understand the regional grouping SADC takes a very dim view of that and is very anti-coups, which is why you've really had coups in southern Africa.
Yeah, I mean, to even say that the SADC takes the idea of a coup d'etat very dim, now it's understating, it's understating it. I think it's an anathema, taboo, within that part of Africa. So I'm not sure they will countenance, any idea of a coup d'etat. Because don't forget that Zimbabwe is a very, very important country. Despite all its current economic and political problems, it's a it used to be the breadbasket of the region, right? And it still is an important, country within SADC. So I'm not sure SADC as a regional grouping will countenance any idea of a coup d'etat, in Zimbabwe.
So do you think this is all hot air that's bound to cool down? Because, I mean, as our chief correspondent John Cookson was saying there, I mean, there are no sort of, travel advisories and things coming out of the embassies in Zimbabwe. And, people who are their correspondents say things appear to be calm.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's hot air, right? I mean, what the general said should be taken seriously. I mean, this is somebody whose major ally, chief ally within the government, the ex-vice president, has been dismissed, right? And the dismissal took place when this general was away in China. So he came back, and realized, the situation. So, I mean, so he rose, he had to hold this press conference and air his views. But like I said earlier on, the situation right now, currently, is very fluid, and anything at all could happen.